All right, everyone should be admitted now. Thank you for attending our webinar about how to navigate the new world of distributed workforces. My name is Christina Giordano, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm a partnerships manager here at AllVoices. To give some context for folks who aren't familiar, AllVoices is an always-on employee listening tool where we really ensure a culture of trust, inclusion, and transparency for companies around the world. And we work with companies who really value diversity, equity, and inclusion. For today's discussion, we're talking about how organizations can really thoughtfully think about employee engagement and company culture amidst the new world of distributed workforces. We know that this isn't completely new for global organizations, since if you're a global org, you have offices in a bunch of different countries, but remote work in the same offices is very different than pre-pandemic. We're defining today distributed workforces as organizations where employees are working in different physical locations, whether it's in their home, at an airport, coffee shop, co-working space, or really anywhere, also referred to as a blended working environment. Just to share a couple of stats for our conversation, CNBC estimates that by 2025, 36.2 million Americans will be working remotely, and this is an 87% increase from pre-pandemic levels, so pre-2020. So it's here to stay. I want to say thank you so much for all of our panelists for your dedicating some time this afternoon to talk to us about how you really thought about your strategy. So if we want to start off, I'll stop talking with introductions. If you want to share your name, pronouns, and a little bit about the work that you do at your company, that would be great. Cara, I'll pass it off to you first.
Thanks so much, Christina. I am Cara Brennan Allamano. I head up the people function at Udemy, and we are a global ed tech company that is scaling quickly. 50% of our employees were hired since last March during the pandemic. And my function includes everything from recruiting and workplace to our people operations. So we, and my pronouns are she, her.
Awesome. And I'll pass it over to Dan Spaulding. And we have Dan and Daniel.
Two Daniels. Hi, everybody. Dan Spaulding. I lead people and culture for Zillow Group. And we are also a fast-scaling company. We are not as international. We have 6,000 employees between the United States and Canada. And we announced last October that we were going to remain a permanently distributed workforce and have really leaned into practices and policies to support remote and distributed work, as well as support our 24 offices that are across the country and are planning what the future of the office is, because we don't think those two things are independent. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I have been here for about 5.5 years.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. And then I'll pass it over to Will.
Thanks, Christina. And hi, everyone. My name is Will. My pronoun is he, him, his, and I am from everywhere and nowhere. I was born in Chicago. I was raised in Taipei, studied in Vancouver, Canada, and then La La Land is my new home, Los Angeles. And if I'm speaking too fast, please slow me down because of my Chinese or Canadian accents all mixed up, and please don't hesitate. And I'm a unicorn in the people space. I work for a company called FabFitFun, and I have a very nonlinear career path. I was an engineer. I jumped into HR, sales, marketing, and then as a management consultant. And then currently, I am the director of performance engagement at FabFitFun. And my mission has been to create a fun and inclusive environment for our people and teams from diverse backgrounds, so they feel safe to speak up and inspired to experiment and learn and grow to be their best, fabulous selves through discovery.
Incredible. Thanks, Will. And last but not least, Daniel, do you want to introduce yourself, your pronouns, and just a little bit of the work you do at RBI?
Sure. Thank you, Christina. So I'm Daniel. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I am Brazilian, so Will, I'm also like from everywhere. I lived in France, and now I'm living in Miami. Prior to that, I moved to New York in 2016. So I'm like constantly moving. I've been in RBI very recent, actually. So I joined Restaurant Brands International, which stands for the brands like Burger King, Popeyes, Tim Hortons. I joined in March. So my first action here as an employee experience director was leading the change on flex work and how we would return to the office. And if we would return, right, based on the discussions. So I led here the basically this project and changes on implementing the new hybrid workplace. We're having now as a policy 60% of the time in the office for a majority of our people. So we have 2,000 people distributed internationally in there's many places, but the headquarters are in 4 different countries. So US, Canada, Switzerland, and Singapore.
Awesome. Thanks for that introduction. Well, I would love to kick off the conversation from the beginning with the research, with all of these changes. Dan, you mentioned that Zillow announced last October that you'd really be switching to a distributed workforce, and you're really not putting limits on geography for a lot of job opportunities. What research went into that to really make that announcement?
Yeah. One, we have a deep surveying culture with our employee base, and we tracked employee sentiment right from, I neglected to say at the beginning, I live here in Seattle, which was the epicenter of the beginning of the pandemic, and we were one of the earliest companies and earliest locations that went into sort of lockdown. And from the beginning, we just surveyed and got a lot of data from our employees. And as those first couple of months happened, it was just really clear that we could work with a lot more flexibility than we had ever worked before. And then you combine that with the fact that we generate so much housing data, we saw the demand shoot through the roof of people wanting to move and people wanting to change where they were. And so for us, it was really the combination of seeing the behavior of the consumers in America buying and moving homes, as well as our employees continuing to tell us they were engaged, they were as happy as you could be during a global pandemic with all of our kids at home, and that they yearned for us to recognize that the world was going to be different coming out of the pandemic. And that drove us to your decision of, you could kind of wait for things to be over to figure this out, or you could try to really start while we had that time, while we were all working from home and frankly couldn't vacation and do as many of the other things as we would normally do. And so that was what became the impetus for us to figure this out and to really start building policies and practices to create as much clarity for our employees as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a lot of employee listening, but also at the same time taking action, iterating. Daniel, you mentioned that you led the project also at RBI to conduct this research and really think about a 60% in-office work week. Where did you start? I know you mentioned a couple of focus groups and surveys as well, but can you walk us through what really that process was?
Sure. I think the good side for everyone is a lot of companies everybody is discussing this. Everybody had the same human experience, I would say, of going through this pandemic and having to be forced to work remotely, right? That's what happened. And I think that there's different learnings. I think it changes based on the company you are and also what your employees are telling. So we conducted this external research, using the think tanks like Gartner, HBR, everybody was writing and talking about it. And I have also have like networks in those different companies. And our employee listening, I think the difference is from what Dan was mentioning, majority of our employees, yes, they wanted flexibility, but they were willing to be in between office and working from home. And that's why, when we do the employee listening and when we applied here for our tools, that's why the direction that we took was hybrid. And it connects a lot to our business, right? It's a business where when we talk about restaurants, people have to be present in those restaurants to be working. And we need as leaders to be there present as well. We believe it's part in our culture to be where things happen, this culture of ownership. So I think that's how we adopted. It was through employee listening, but I think the inputs were different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to note not organizations have a one size fits all approach because everybody is different sizes, different folks. And at the top of the webinar, I mentioned some organizations, this isn't an unfamiliar territory for global organizations who have, folks in different countries, different time zones. Cara, would love to start off with you for this question. How are you thinking about distributed work from country specific, job specific? What needs to be local and what is really like company wide?
Yeah, it's really interesting when I compare our journey at Udemy to Dan and Daniel's journeys as well. A couple things. One is we and our CEO said, hey, we're going to be conservative around this. We will not be the leader. We will not be the first to make calls here. We will follow and we will learn from others. We have learning is the foundation of our culture, being an education technology platform. And we use that as a framework for how we were going to approach this question of what does the future of work at Udemy look like. So I'm very lucky to have people like Dan out there making these decisions, building policies, writing blogs, Daniel, collating thought leadership from Gartner and Harvard Business Review, et cetera, so that we can learn from others and decide for ourselves what works best. And I also recognize there's privilege in that, being able to be a company that can sit back because we are so tech forward in terms of how we engage. The other thing that happened throughout the pandemic with Udemy is we became a truly global company during that time. Going into the pandemic, we were founded in San Francisco. We're now about 1,000 employees. 50% of our employees were hired during this time frame. So we had a lot of flexibility to determine what the future looked like for us. We were able to be patient because we were a primary a tech-oriented organization. And then the third piece is that during this time frame, we have moved from a San Francisco-centric, even a North American-centric company to a company that's hiring more people outside of the U.S. than inside the U.S. So for us, it was about thinking about how do we globalize? How do we become a virtual company, not just a company that's remote first, a company that's virtual and can work across different time zones? So the complexity was, we have added layers of complexity from our organization standpoint. So that is part of the reason we're patient and we're looking externally. In terms of where we've landed, we have just started communicating across our organization that we will be determining the type of work location at the team level, because we realize that even within, say, our product organization, we have some teams that are all in San Francisco that will want to be in person. And we have other teams that are quite literally in Ankara, Turkey, Dublin, Denver, Austin, and San Francisco. So we wanted to give the flexibility for those teams to determine what works best for them. And we're moving forward with an initiative that we'll be rolling out in Q3 that is around team charters, where each team can construct the work style, including location, including working hours, including in-person meetings, including offices, and including their hiring that will work for them on a quarter-by-quarter basis. And what we ask from employees and managers and leaders are two things. One is communication and collaboration around the decisions they're making as a virtual work environment in these charters. And then the second is commitment. So we're asking for a commitment on a quarterly basis to the type of work that the team is going to do. And then, of course, we want to learn and iterate on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hear what you're saying, too, is all of these changes that you're implementing, what we're asking from employees, especially managers and teams. And I think that's across the board. And a big part of communicating these changes is transparency. How are you building these plans? Will, I would love to ask at FabFitFun, how transparent were you in kind of talking about building out these return to work strategies and new plans for the future of work?
Definitely, Christina, and I love Cara's idea on like team charter. I love that, and definitely helping remote work and our workforce. And related to transparency, we see transparency as an opportunity, a way to build smart trust with our people. So meaning that we have been using proper channel like AllVoices in different engagement survey platform to communicate updates regarding our return to work strategy and future plans. So in that strategy, it's not only about like top down. It's not only about like senior leader communicating to our people about what the plan looks like, but how we make decisions about the plan. It's really about how we get together as a community. So it's about how we encourage participation of our people and to make the decision together through feedback. And that indirectly create a continuous feedback culture with our people. So it's not like, hey, this is the direction we're going into, but like, how can you be part of that decision-making process? So for example, we use different tools. I mentioned about AllVoices, manager meetings, and one-on-one check-ins. So we really take an evidence-based approach or data-based approach to collect feedback from our people and show them, hey, here are what we have heard from you, and how might we leverage that data to communicate the progress of new plans. So people really feel they're part of that process. And the key thing to transparency is that our people are always part of the conversation. So they feel they're included as we communicate about our plan.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Daniel, what are your thoughts around that in terms of when you're building out RBI strategy? How transparent were you in communicating with employees what you're thinking and the research you're finding?
Yeah, I think we added them on the conversation. All the employees, myself included, we added from surveys, etc. And always communicating. I think that there was a concern. I think when I hear other companies when we're talking and inside, it's like, oh, should we disclose? Are we setting? As Cara was mentioning, there was a lot of unknown, and we still are. There's a lot of unknown here. What I always said from an employee experience leader here is employee experience is not about giving to your employees what they're asking. It's about asking them what they want and giving feedback. And for me, that was very important. So there was no reason to be afraid to ask. There was no reason to be afraid to talk but always setting the expectations that not because it's being asked is that what we're going to do. Luckily, yeah, when we do the research and we asked employees what they wanted, majority wanted hybrid. So when we did our research with external partners and in the pillars, dimensions in the company, like talent attraction or the government, like legal and tax, like what would be the scenario where it would be more beneficial for us as a company as well? I think those things, they merged, right? And ultimately, I think what is good for employees, yes, most of the times it is good for the company. So I think we're very transparent on that, asking for feedback and asking for opinions, but providing the feedback why something was like this and why not.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I also forgot to mention for the audience who is listening in, if you do have a question, you can type it in on the right-hand side and we will answer it throughout this conversation. So don't be shy. If you have questions for anybody, feel free to drop it in there. But another topic that is related to asking and receiving feedback is just that foundation of having trust amongst your organization and employees. It's a big topic right now in terms of psychological safety, both virtual, in-person, and hybrid. And there's this new social contract with employees, managers, and just the overall company. This question is for everyone, but I'll start with Cara here. How are you really thinking creatively about building that trust amongst and with employees?
This is something that I think is top of mind for all of us at Udemy, especially during a high growth period. I feel like there are a couple components of building trust that are really important. One is openness. The other is honesty. I think transparency sometimes is such a loaded word that I actually look to try and find other descriptors to use. But I think we're lucky that we have a very open and honest CEO. We have a culture where one of our values is earnest authenticity. And with that openness and honesty, I think we were really challenged as leaders and as employees, we're all employees of the organization, to be able to be clear that we are an unknown. And I think some of this was really nice during the pandemic for us to be able to get to a place of vulnerability as leaders. And because we are so far afield of anything that we could have gone to school for, anything that we would have experienced in our careers to date, that it really came down to being human and showing the care and concern for other humans that happen to be our coworkers and happen to be connected to us in this virtual environment. So when I think about this, I think about when my CEO, during some of the social unrest last summer, in addition to the pandemic, during an all hands call, just said, look, I'm just going to recognize this is freaking hard. Like, this is not easy. And all of us need to be there for each other and recognize that it's not easy for the person on the other side of the screen either. And everybody's going to have their good days and their bad days. So I think what it helped us do as organizations is as our organization is really lean into that earnest authenticity and also be able to talk about things like mental health and family needs, as well as concerns around trust and representation across the organization at a deeper level. And I hope that we can continue those conversations as we move into a new normal. We're trying to be really clear to everyone that there will never be a back to normal. There will be a new normal. And we're asking ourselves as people leaders, as HR leaders, how do we now continue to formalize some of those things that we brought in during that time that helped ultimately get to a point of real trust? And I wrote down smart trust when you shared that, Will. How do we get to a place where we're not losing some of that authenticity that we brought to the table? And how do we leverage that to just continue to engage employees and be a better organization?
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I think as you know, a really practical way that you can build trust, since I think Cara said that well, like, we're so far afield of anything we've all been academically prepared for, or even our work experience has prepared most of us for. You know, one of the ways that we've tried to build trust through this process was when we put together our initial policy document on we have 4 categories of work: fully remote, field-based, hybrid, and office-based, because we have jobs that, for compliance and legal reasons, have to be done in an office. So you can be flexible, but there are certain components of some jobs that are still going to be tied to an office. And we don't believe that the answer is just one approach for all employees because of how different jobs are. But as we prepared those policy, the literal policy document, we shared it with all 6,000 or at that time about 4,800 of our employees, and asked for their thoughts, asked for their questions, asked for their feedback. And I know some of it, you know, sometimes you hear that and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want that. But you know, the funny thing is, you really, you don't get feedback from a lot of people. But what you do is you show your thinking. You explain. You know, for us, we took a job profile approach to job categorization because we were worried team by team might lead to employees being treated differently that do the same work, which could be problematic from an equity standpoint. And so sharing some of your thought process, and then even just letting your employees in. And I think there's so many wonderful ways to do that. AllVoices is a platform that helps you do that. Roundtables. But this is also a really unique time where you can generate ideas from your employees. And you know, one of the things we've talked a lot about is none of us are in this alone. I don't have a pandemic playbook into distributed workforce playbook. We're all creating it together. And I think the more your employees feel they have a voice and an input to that process, it's a very tangible way that you can redefine trust and bridge that trust gap that sometimes exists between HR and your employee base.
I think you're muted, Daniel.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was muted on the computer. So I think piggybacking on Dan's comments and Cara, I think there were many discussions around, okay, how do we build this trust given that everybody's remote? Are we trusting managers that are like, how will I know if we keep remote, that people are actually working the times that I assume they are working. And I think our job as HR teams and people, given the audience here, is also come back to our culture and redefine. So the world is going to keep evolving. There's new technology, but the culture, in my opinion, it prevails. Like, we just have to redefine what does that mean. So at RBI, we have a very strong culture of ownership, of you owning your things, taking responsibility, taking accountability. And if you have this culture of ownership, we have to redefine that, hey, owners, it doesn't matter if they're working from home or working here, they know what they have to do. And we trust our employees that they're owners of what they do. So I think it's this is also, when you're building this strategy, I think there's this famous quote of Peter Drucker that, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think is, no matter what you do, no matter what you write for a strategy or for a policy, you always have to remember and remind everyone, what is your culture? Is this connected to the culture, right? Because you cannot just copy paste a playbook from another company and assume that it's going to work here. And I think we redefined this internally as well. We said it's working because our people are owners, and I think that's go back to the playbook of your culture, see how people behave, and I think try to remind the leadership and the people that this is connected to who you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, around building that smart trust. I love that phrase that you mentioned as well.
Yeah, and I love all panelists' comments around like being human, right? Like what Cara talked about, being human in the workplace. What Dan talked about, we're in this together. It's uncertain. We don't have a playbook, right? And Daniel talked about like culture. I agree on all that. And I think for what I've learned in the past year during the pandemic was really about, what role does manager play? What do they play a role in the company? And I've learned that they play a very, very important role. Like, it's so important where it's not, the CEO, the C-level can talk about people are important, but our employees are really rely on their interaction with their managers, like on a day-to-day regular basis. It's not only about like manager reaching out or the peer reaching out to say, how are you? But really like, how are you? It's not just in the meeting, we ask them once. When we ask, how are you? There are a lot of things beneath the surface that they are struggling, being a parent, right? Staying at home and a lot of different struggles and mental health, like what Cara talked about. And that's, I believe, where managers play that role there, like building trust. And then Christina, you talk about psychological safety. So that's where I think building trust and psychological safety is interconnected, where in those one-on-one conversation, manager can build those trust. So in terms of creative way, I will say managers do that, like helping and really show empathy and caring for their people in their one-on-one, and not just at whole hands say, hey, everyone, I know, it's tough. Definitely those are important, but also in the day-to-day conversation, that's what we are helping our managers to learn, because it's new to a lot of our managers as well. They haven't managed a team of remote workforce, or distributed workforce, where they need to show that human side of them, like caring about their people, especially in a one-on-one setting. And that's where I see the biggest opportunity is for, the one-on-one interaction on a regular basis.
Christina, I want to build on what Will said. I totally agree that it really, interestingly, in the virtual environment, it created the role of the manager as the link to the organization really was elevated. And then Deborah McNeil is asking, how do you incorporate, this check-in more on a regular basis? And one thing we did at Udemy was we asked ourselves, how do we formalize some of these things, and how do we support our managers with job aids and coaching aids to make their job easier? Because it's one thing to say, hey, check in, make sure that you're worried about family, schools, all these things that now are on the manager plate because they're on the employee plate. We created a tool called the Work from Home Canvas, and it actually mapped to, and Itamar Goldmans came up with this via org hacking first, and we we modeled it internally at Udemy. And what it does is it maps a number of questions to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it starts with everything from like, are you sleeping? What is your food like? What's your physical activity like? All the way up to, are you on track from your career progression perspective? How are you feeling about that? And I think a lot of times we say you should worry about all this as a manager, but to have something where we're asking employees to self-assess, check in on these different fronts, and then initiate a conversation in your next one-on-one. And we as an entire company asked our folks to talk about their work from home canvas. And then we've since on a quarterly basis asked managers and employees to check in so that we're modeling that behavior and we're giving folks guidelines of how to effectively have these types of conversations in a work environment where we're navigating all these really interesting boundaries that we never had before. So I found that, like I said, the work from home canvas has worked for us, but I know there are lots of other really great tools that have worked in organizations when we've entered into this space of unknown. And I think that's something that we on the people side of business can really have a strong impact by formalizing and creating tools for our managers as well as our employees so they feel empowered.
Absolutely. I think that definitely makes sense. And I think getting specific around not only asking, to Will's point, how are you, and expecting, okay, good, like actually asking, how are you? Are you sleeping? Are you, like, those are real questions that you should be asking. And most likely you're asking those questions on Zoom, on Slack, in a virtual environment. And another question from the audience, which is also a really relevant topic today, is how do you navigate Zoom fatigue with your employees? And this really goes to effective communication and building trust that you usually get face-to-face time with as well. Dan, I'll pass this question to you first.
Yeah, I think this is really tough. I think like a lot of conversations with the challenges of everything that we've been through in the last year, it's one, you got to start with acknowledging that Zoom fatigue is real. Practical solutions that we've deployed, because not only is there Zoom fatigue, we've expanded our workforce. From at the start of the pandemic, we were in 24 states around the country. Now we're in all 50 states. So you're dealing with the time zone challenge as well. And we recognize we're going to be in this formation permanently. So we had to come up with new solutions. And so two things practically we've done to try and combat Zoom fatigue is one, we do core collaboration hours where it's a 4-hour period during every day that it's 10 to 2 Pacific. So, you do the math, that's 1 to 5 Eastern, and then you can kind of move to the West Coast from there, that we try to fit all large group meetings into. And to recognize that time zones are real challenges. And if there's a critical team and large group meeting, trying to fit your meetings into that. And then recognizing, of course, there's one-on-ones and there's connects that might not fall in those core collaboration hours, but you can manage a little bit differently so that, we're really focusing on how do you eliminate meetings? How do you get more work done asynchronously? And core collaboration hours are a good forcing function to try and work through that. And then we're also trying to do more asynchronous work. So writing documents and sharing those for feedback versus having a meeting. And then good old fashioned reminding people, you don't have to do everything on Zoom. I switched all of my standing regular one-on-ones back to the phone where I could put my AirPods in and I could walk around and I could sit outside and it's little things like that. So there's the big sort of change management, major things you can do to try and combat it. But there's also the continued acknowledgement of the shared humanity that we're all going through. This is really hard. And these little hacks can save you, by just shifting my personal one-on-ones to the telephone, I saved probably a good 90 to 120 minutes a day where I'm not looking at myself on a screen. I'm talking to somebody on the phone instead. And it just it's done wonders for the not feeling planted to a chair. So those are a couple tangible ways that we've tried to tackle Zoom fatigue.
I love that. I love the good tangible tips. Does anyone else have anything to add for Zoom fatigue?
I think I can add, if I may, is to Dan's point about like, it's very unnatural to stare at Zoom like each other and see my own face. It's not natural before the pandemic, like seeing my face, seeing my hair, right? And in meeting before in person, I've never seen myself, right? And that's where I think like allow space for people to turn off their cameras. I've tried that several times. Like when I have back-to-back meeting, I just turn off my camera. I feel much better and safer from a psychological safety standpoint. And also, like I've learned from some of the workshop or meetings that we have was to create breakout rooms, especially with like Zoom, because oftentimes when you have 20 people in the same meeting, it's hard to have a conversation on Zoom. So that's where the Zoom fatigue happen. Like people, especially introverts, feel anxious. Like I want to contribute, but I couldn't because the extroverts are talking all the time. And so that is like creating breakout rooms, or even relate to that is like send agenda beforehand. We're having Zoom meeting. Like what's the purpose of the meeting? Do I need to be there? And then even after the meeting, how do I create space for people who don't want to speak up in the meeting to share their feedback or comments? And that, I believe, will help with the Zoom fatigue, because not everything needs to be said in the Zoom meeting.
Yeah, I love that point. How do we create space? And this relates to another question from the audience too, in terms of how do you maintain an equitable and inclusive work environment for all employees in a distributed workspace? I've heard that Zoom could be the ultimate equalizer, where everyone's on a screen and you see what's going on in the background, whether it's kids, parents, whoever you're. But it's also, if you don't want to have your camera on the whole time, it could be kind of a disadvantage to other folks as well. What are your thoughts around how to really create an equitable workplace? Daniel, I'll pass to you first.
Yeah, so I think the main challenge for us, we're moving towards a hybrid, right? We're not there yet. We're moving July. In hybrid, one of the things you have from a diversity and inclusion perspective is the separation of half of the group is in a room and half of the group is, all virtual. And I think you have to be very mindful of that. There's actually studies that's not on RBI, but outside, that are showing that people that are in the office, they have a probability of being promoted faster than people that are working fully remote, right? I think it's being aware of that. And how do you tackle those things to mitigate, this from happening? And I think what we're adopting, actually had today training for our employees, where we're encouraging people, and we're also potentially this will have impacts in our office infrastructure, where if you have a larger meeting, let's say 6 or more, the advisory now is you should do it fully remote, right? Everybody, because then you give the same opportunity for people who are in the office and working from home or remotely to join in an equal way, right? So I think those are examples of things to be practical and pragmatic as well, of things to guarantee, focusing on the hybrid. And also, when we talk about the policy itself, I think it's understanding and learning that some groups might be, potentially benefited from that, or from working from home longer. But this is something that we're mapping now. I think we're not there yet. I think right now we're being very open-minded to understand and to learn by doing. And that's how we can evolve and move fast.
Absolutely. I think that's definitely really important. And another piece of just wanting to feel like you're included and that you belong in a company is when you're new and you join the team remotely. You don't have the opportunity to meet your manager in person, whether it's your job function or you're in a hybrid approach. Has anyone adapted their onboarding programs to make sure that new folks joining the company really do feel like they're part of the company culture, no matter where they are in the world?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. We, the first phone call I made when we as an executive team had decided to stay home, ask our employees to stay home last March, was to my head of learning and development around our upcoming, this was a Sunday and we had a Monday morning onboarding class. And so we moved everything online. We're a platform that does that. So we had the benefit at Udemy of using Udemy to create a learning path and an onboarding experience that really aligned with who we were. And what I think is really important is that we had to reassess what are the objectives that we have for onboarding. We doubled down on it, and then we reconstructed and iterated on that throughout the last 15 months. Now, the good news is that we've gotten really amazing feedback on our onboarding program. I personally think that onboarding is probably the most important program that an HR team does in a high growth environment, because you're setting your folks up for success or you're not in those first few weeks. But we also folded in a lot more relationship building activities, because we couldn't count on the de facto relationship building that would happen in a physical environment. So we had to add some of those pieces in. But I do think that, again, as HR people, this is something that we really are going to continue to have as one of our top priorities, and it's going to continue to be really important to the strategic success of our business.
Dan, have you adapted kind of onboarding programs or the way you look at kind of bringing on new talent from going, I think you mentioned 4,800 to 6,000?
Yeah, and I totally agree with everything that's been said here. You have to be hyper intentional about this. You have to really lean on how does your culture show up now in a distributed way. So that question of an equitable and inclusive environment for people who are remote and people in the office. Again, I go back to first you have to recognize that an equitable experience is going to be something that you have to constantly work towards. And what are the places where you have to say, hey, here's a challenge. And I think the group has said it, meetings, right? Our strategy is if it's a standing regular meeting, if one person's on Zoom, all people need to be on Zoom. But if it's a team dedicated offsite where everyone's traveling to one of our locations to do an offsite and someone's like, oh, I can't come because of whatever reason, that you can't slow the whole group down and try to throw them on Zoom when they made an intentional decision to come together and plan as a team. And so equity, it's an important topic to really talk about. And sometimes people hear equity say, oh, well, equity means everything is the same all the time. And I think as you explore this work and what this really means, it's going to mean understanding where are the traps to where people can be disengaged, people cannot feel included on both sides of the equation, teams of people and individuals, and how do you try your best to strategize around that? Because as we all know, like these are really hard and individual topics to tackle, and so that's how we're trying to think about this, is what are the if-then scenarios, and how do we feel about those if-then scenarios, and how do we think those are going to play out? And again, then sharing that back with our employees of like, this is our best guess. We're going to have to see what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important to acknowledge unconscious and conscious bias, where the pitfalls could be in an organization. I like the what if statements too, and just planning for the future as well, and not being reactive but proactive. We've been talking a lot about the challenges of shifting to a different workspace, going to a hybrid or remote first workplace, but there's also opportunities as well, especially with funds and just investing time, money, and resources into different programs. There was one study by Global Workplace Analytics that showed if 50% of the U.S. working population was to go to more flexible options, businesses would save around $700 billion a year, from the offices to free lunches and all of the things or perks you would get in office. I would love to ask kind of this group of leaders, like, where should this saved money go? Obviously, knowing you don't have $700 billion at each organization, but saved money, should it go to onboarding, mentorship, resources? There's so many options. Where do you start? Will, I'll pass it to you first.
Sure. So Christina, I believe the saved money should go to make the world definitely a better place, because there are just a lot of challenges happening, right? Racial injustice, what's happening in our society, right? And the pandemic. So I think really like focusing on us as human beings through like 3 areas. I think one is around well-being. I think Cara and some others talked about, with a distributed workforce, like it is important to ensure like people stay connected and taking care of ourselves first. If we cannot take care of ourselves, we cannot show up as an authentic self at work. And that includes like providing coaching and mental health support for our people, as stress and anxiety are at an all-time high right now. Even if we're not feeling that, like a lot of our friends and family are going through anxiety, trauma, and depression. And, I think that's where, putting invest time and resources into that area as a human race is so important. It's not just like specific company, but like how do we take care of ourselves, and providing time for us to take care of our family and friends. And I think the second part is community impact, is where how do we enable our people, in addition to their work, like they can find their meaning and purpose, especially during this time. So they can participate in a cause or causes or like donate. And as a business, like what can we do to reduce our environmental impact across the globe, right? So how do we innovate to reduce our carbon footprint, for example? So our product is really focusing on the box. And so like how do we reduce carbon footprint on like a smaller box, more environmentally friendly option. So around community impact, I think that's where the funding should go. And the third is like we talked about earlier around diversity inclusion. I think part of that is belonging. So like how do we instill a sense of belonging for onboarding, for learning and development, for how we promote, how we build a performance and inclusive culture, is that every human feel that they're part of the community. No one's left out from the conversation, from the meeting. And that sense of belonging is hard. And I've gone through it myself because I've traveled a lot when I was younger with my parents. I live in different part of the world where like trying to find that authentic self and authentic voice is hard. And I'm still learning about that as the people, part of the people of color, as Asian. I think that's another part is how might we create that space that people really truly feel that they belong, and not just showing up as we are the same because we're different.
Cara, Dan, do you have any additions to kind of that answer? I thought that was great.
I think it's an amazing answer. Absolutely. I would just caution, this is also going to potentially be a lot more expensive. So I think a lot of the media is focusing on headlines of like, oh, if people don't go, we're keeping our offices and we're going to be transporting people more frequently, if teams are gathering in different parts of the country. So, where do I believe the money's going to go? I think it's going to be 2 things. One, I do think offices will get smaller, but I think travel for some employees could increase. And then I also think the inflation that we're seeing in the general economy, I think we're going to continue to see that on compensation. And then I think a lot of companies have also made big commitments and investments into the equity, belonging, and inclusion space. And I know for us, we've always invested there, and we still doubled our budget coming into this year because of all of the inherent challenges of now trying to do this work and being separated physically is a new challenge that you're going to have to invest more in. So, but we very much take a standpoint. We are not doing this because we think we're going to save money. We're doing this because we think we can redesign a better workplace for our employees and start to tackle some of these chronic issues that we've never been able to tackle in corporate America. The long commutes, people opting out of the workplace because they don't feel comfortable, not being there for our children, in a whole variety of ways. So we're always very quick to say, this isn't about saving money. This is about rethinking where and how we spend our money. And boy, I hope as an HR professional that leads to obviously the bulk of that money going back to our employees.
Yeah, I ditto to both Dan and Will. I think I follow with Will's sentiment that the hope is that as we reconstruct our how we work, that we are thoughtful about areas that could be at risk in a virtual environment, which are things like belonging and inclusion, which I think is at the front of all people leaders' minds right now. But I also, we're doing second half planning. We're doing planning for next year at Udemy. And as Dan said, I'm not seeing a whole bucket of money. I think it's easy for assumptions to be made in terms of what potential savings are. But I think that's the trick in all of this is, yes, if you look at how we used to do things and you overlay, we don't have offices like we used to, so there must be a huge amount of savings there. If you think about it from the prior paradigm, of course, there's going to be assumptions that are incorrect. What we're doing is really looking at it as a blank slate and a go forward. And a couple of the things that I'm thinking about and want to make sure we're doubling down in are things like learning, which are really important for us, particularly at Udemy, but enabling our employees to be able to thrive in the new environment. There's lots of new skills, lots of new behaviors that everyone's going to have to learn to do a good job. And then feedback and people analytics. Those are things that are going to be that much more important when we're not able to get all of those nonverbal cues, when we're not able to pass each other in the hallway and make, physically be able to count or see or give hugs. Analytics and data are going to be things that we're going to have to really have a pulse on from an employee standpoint. And all that just comes under the umbrella of feedback. And, that's AllVoices, that's other platforms that are going to help us do a better job.
Absolutely. A culture of feedback is something that we definitely believe in. And I know everyone on the call believes in as well in terms of building that psychological safety continuously. Definitely not a box to be checked, one and done, one size fits all approach. As we're nearing the end of our conversation, I always like to ask if there's any advice that you would like to reemphasize, reiterate for the folks that are listening as we are building the ship, as we're on it for this new kind of world of work, an equitable workplace, and also in terms of along those same lines for a culture of feedback, what tools and strategies do you use to to conduct that employee listening? Daniel, I know you talked about focus groups and surveys, so definitely want to make sure that people know how to do that. So a key takeaway, advice, and then how you collect feedback. Daniel, you can go first.
I think I'll reinforce what I said. It's very easy now with so much information. Everything you open is talking about hybrid, the new trend, remote, the new trend, and the savings. I think as leaders, we always have to go back to our culture, what connects us as an organization. I think my main message is don't fall for trends. I think understand, of course, the trends, where the world is going, but understand who you are as a company, as an essence. I've seen many people just getting, the playbook that another company was creating and trying to just copy paste. And I think given our audience here from HR leaders, I think always try to, of course, read, but understand who you are. And that's why focus groups from employees. I always like to conduct, the surveys and things, the engagement surveys, but never replace conversation. I think surveys can give you some direction, but the focus groups and conversation is a way for people to structure the thinking. And I think don't be afraid to push. I think there's no hard truth. It's a Socrates thing, right? So if someone believes in that, the office should be maintained or we should keep everything as it is, provoke. I think ask people to think again, because if you have data to support, right? But I think my main message here is always go back to the culture.
Will, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So I think definitely culture is so important. 100% agree with Daniel there. And I think the part is we're learning together. I think the key takeaway is really embrace the uncertainty. A lot of things is the first time we're learning about how to engage our employees, what tools we should use, but also through that learning, I think I see this as a learning process that we are not controlling every steps, every policy and everything, but really embrace that uncertainties and enjoy the process. I think that's part of it. And being present, I think being part of that process and as the things unfold for ourselves, and really just, really work with our teams and our leaders, our managers, to really move one step at a time and make progress to a better place, and versus just, having everything ready to go. And I definitely embrace the learning process.
Cara.
Hard to add more to that, but that I think it's the listening, it's the feedback, it's the being authentic, and from my perspective, this is an exciting time to be a people leader. This is when we are able to tie what we do to business outcomes in a really amazing way, and there is a lot of focus on the well-being as well as the engagement of employees. So we all have been, everybody says we want a seat at the table. Like the chair is there, we're sitting in it. Now's the time for us to really innovate and learn about what's happening out there. And I get super excited because what we thought was going to take 10 or 20 years in terms of future work is right here, right now, in 10 months. And it's probably one of the most exciting times to be on the HR side of business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely something that's come up in these webinars and also our podcast as well with people leaders, is they're saying a lot of people are coming to them to ask to solve any and all of their problems that they have in an organization. Dan, what key takeaway do you want to reemphasize and advice you have for folks?
I think you've thrown it to me, but I totally lost Cara there. So can somebody give me a head nod if you can hear me right now? Because I can't hear anybody. All right. Cara, I'm sure what you said was brilliant. I was trying to sit here and figure out if it was you or if it was me. And sorry for the audio challenges. My biggest piece of advice here is to scenario plan. I think Daniel said it so well. We're all very different businesses, and your business is very different and very complicated in its own right. And I think what you have to do is motivate your leadership team right now to think through how this is going to play out for your business, and don't be scared to be honest about it. Like, one of our core beliefs is power to the people. The people are going to get what they want, and every employee is expecting more freedom in terms of planning their day than maybe we allowed in the past for certain jobs. And that's going to be something we're all going to have to grapple with. And I really liked how Will said it. Don't worry about being perfect. Worry about getting started here and trying to use this as an opportunity to connect and build trust with your employees. But people are going to get what they want here. And it's okay that might not work for your org or for some of your employees. That's also going to be a reality that we're trying to scenario plan ourselves. Is some people really are going to miss the fact we were in the office 5 days a week, and being honest about that. So just really step back and ask those questions. Well, what happens if that doesn't happen? Or what happens if what your assumption about the office is to the executive team, if those don't hold true? And I think there's some real magic in those conversations. And
absolutely. Lead with empathy, vulnerability, clear communication, and just have that conversation with employees to build that trust continuously. Cara, Will, Daniel, Dan, thank you so much for speaking on our webinar this afternoon, and to our audience for listening. I know we had over 125 people register, and more folks are going to watch us on demand for the recording. So thank you for your time. And as a reminder, at AllVoices, we believe in providing employees from all backgrounds a psychologically safe place for them to provide feedback to their employees to create that inclusive environment. If you have any questions, please let me know, but have a great rest of your afternoon wherever you are in the world.